There's an argument for optimism, and I'll start with that. So my argument for optimism sort of starts here. It starts with the fact that Michigan, their schedule, if you look at it, they have played East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. On its face, it's like, well, they haven't played anybody yet. So they must be, the top-ranked unit in every category, right? Wrong. Let me pull up the rankings. So go to rankings, top defense, rushing defense. They are number 12, which is respectable. But again, let's look at who they've played. Nebraska is the number one rush defense on NCAA. And I also want you to look at overall defense, total defense. So Michigan is the number 3 total defense, but I want you to take a look at who is number 25. Yeah. Northern Illinois is the number 25 defense. Well, where's Minnesota? I believe they're like 69. So I was about right. So they're 69. So Minnesota, I mean, you just look at all the teams we've played, they're better than the teams that Michigan has played. Let's look at rushing offense. Okay, rushing offense. Nebraska is the number 6th ranked rushing offense. And that's, again, one of our better offensive games, probably our most complete offensive game, quite frankly, was against the 25th best rushing offense or rushing defense in the country in Northern Illinois. So let's look at where Michigan is in rushing offense. Number 49. So this is why I've gone through this, because you're starting to see the picture of what I'm saying. This is a team that's their identity. Their identity is what we're trying to be, essentially. That's been the talking point of this entire week. Yep. And yet they haven't really played anybody, and they are the 49th best rushing offense going against number 6 best rushing offense in Nebraska. Yeah. You look at the defensive stats, and there we are at number 1 in rushing defense. And also rushing defensive efficiency was a top 1 as well. But that's my point. An argument for optimism in this game is, look, this is Jim Harbaugh's 2nd game back as the head coach on the sidelines. This is their first away game. They've played 4 sort of progressively harder opponents. And, this is sort of a recipe for, we could jump out a little bit and surprise Michigan. I think we'll be the hardest opposing team they've played so far. I'm thinking about their practices, because they play each other in practice, and I'm sure they got plenty of work. Yeah. But so that's my argument for optimism.
And I looked at those same things that you were looking at for like the stats and everything, just preparing for this podcast. And I was actually really surprised by a lot of what I saw, because if you look at our 2 schedules just side to side, we've played the harder schedule up until this point.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Yeah. And when we're leading them in a couple really key metrics that they're known for, quote unquote, known for. So it is a definite reason for optimism just going in. And those are with 2 games, especially on the offensive stats. That's with 2 games where our offense was inept. Inept.
Yes.
Okay. One thing I did also want to point out is our time of possession is one of the best in the country on offense.
Yes.
And that's just not translating to points. So you look at those 2 things. Is this the time? Is this the week where you can look at that stuff and it's not just paper tigers? Is the defense real? Definitely going to have that, but there's definitely that reason for optimism.
Argument for optimism. Well, I mean, JJ McCarthy hasn't been great so far. He's a really he's got a lot of potential. Jim Harbaugh's on record saying he thinks he could be one of the best quarterbacks in Michigan history and all this stuff. So the potential's there with JJ McCarthy, but he threw 3 interceptions versus Bowling Green. So it's like, our defense has been clamoring to get takeaways, and turnovers are like, I heard Josh Banderas on the radio the other day, and he was talking about how they're just a bit of an enigma, playing hard and is being in the right position. But even if you play hard and be in the right position, they may or may not go your way. So it's just about just catching the heat with the turnovers. So I believe we might have some opportunities for that. 2 more, actually, arguments for optimism. One thing that, and I'll keep quoting him till the cows come home, Bill Bush, he talked about how the center of their offensive line was so dominant last year. They had the guy with, he had a hard to say, very complicated name that started with an O, but his last name was Timmy, something like that, or first name Timmy. Anyway, but he was the Joe Moore and the Remington Award-winning center. And if you're going to point at something as a critique of Michigan between this year and last year, they're weaker in the middle of this year, and that's probably what's resulted in them not being able to run it at will like they had been able to run it at will. I mean, this being an Eagles fan, the center of your line is so important. And if you can have just a rock solid field general at center that's just going to be dependable 100% of the time, it makes life so so much easier. And I'm not saying the new guy's bad, but we're talking about a guy who stayed in Lincoln. Timmy last year, their center. We're talking about a guy who stayed in Lincoln for a week to get the Remington and Outland, I think was those. Anyway, dude was a beast. That's the point. And they lost him. So that's one of the reasons why I believe. And then you look at our team. It's like, if you like, our defenses looked great, but if you had to point out one strength, what would it be? Probably that Nash Hutmacher has finally come on. Probably that, like, he's making it a problem in the middle. Mm-hmm. Same with Ty Robinson, both those dudes. So it's a little bit interesting when you look at that fact. It's like, man, they could maybe cause some havoc in there. So that's one argument for optimism. One other argument for optimism is the fact that we have sort of started to form our identity as an option team. And if there's one thing about the option, it's that it's old school style of offense, really, that back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, that's the first thing you taught as a defensive coordinator was how to defend the option. Because if you could defend the option, everything else sprung off of that, because pretty much everybody ran something based on the option or compact run schemes like that. Well, these days it's not the case. And Michigan's D coordinator is from the NFL. They never see the option. And so it's like, well, now they have to switch it up a little bit just for 1 week with a D coordinator who's not overly experienced in dealing with the option.
Yeah.
So
I'm just sitting here like smiling because you said you're like keep going back and forth, but every time you talk about the game more and more, you start hyping yourself up into a Nebraska win, and I could just see it on your face. You keep hyping it up, and I'm trying to be realistic.
I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying. I'm just making points over here, okay? And if the points are resonating with you, then you're getting hyped up by my points. That's on you, not me.
No, I see it in your face because you started like this, and then you started getting gradual, and then the more you thought about it.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, it's true. It's just like you look, everyone wants to do use the transitive property on college football, right? Well, Nebraska lost to Minnesota, and Minnesota just lost to Northwestern, so that means Northwestern must beat us, right? Stuff like that. And there's even a saying in the MMA world, which is like MMA math doesn't work. Same thing. Styles make fights, matchups make football games, right? And so at the end of the day, that's really why we do these previews, because you look at the details of how these teams are orientated, and that'll tell you if we got a chance or not most times. That's why Colorado was able to jump on top of us in that second half, because of the way the game played out and because of their strengths and our weaknesses. They were able to take advantage of some things. So with Michigan, it's like you look at it, and I'm starting to convince myself, because it looks a little bit like a puzzle piece. Like, our strengths can match up with their strengths. And I'm not saying they're weak in those areas, but they're not as strong as they used to be. So it's definitely interesting.
Sure. And you have to remember, they have a featured back. He's a fifth-year guy at this point, Corum.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. Looking at this is an interesting stat when I was preparing. One of the top rushers in the country is the back for Minnesota. And we held him to 20-something yards?
Well, actually, I believe that the back that was featured against us for Minnesota is Sean Tyler, and they actually went with their backup for the next couple of games. He's now become their starter, and he's sort of tearing it up. So that's a little bit of an argument for maybe they hadn't quite figured their stuff out yet.
Yeah.
So it is what it is, man. These
so
things
that's what
happen.
I'm saying. Like, this is the best back that we've come into contact with, really. Having those couple weeks to get into the flow of things, having that line behind it, there are reasons to be excited about the game. I mean, we went to the Oklahoma game last year. It was not a great experience. It was a great first quarter. We'll say that. It was a great first quarter.
Yeah, After half of the first quarter.
First half. Okay, yeah, first half of the first quarter. Electric, man. Electric.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen again. And there's a lot that makes me want to not believe that it will. Just a lot more hope with this game. For one, we have a head coach.
Yeah.
that wasn't just fired. We didn't just lose to Georgia Southern. We beat two teams that we were supposed to beat, and you're going in third straight home game. Definitely the biggest team to come into Lincoln in a really long time. Number 2 ranked. They're still number 2, right?
Yeah, number 2.
Yeah,
number 2 in the nation.
So they're still number 2 coming into Lincoln. A lot to prove on both ends. They just do, and I'm hyped for it, but I want the team, for the team's sake, I want them to go out and not lay an egg.
Yeah.
So
Agree with that. I mean, to that point, I don't feel the same way I felt last year when we were going into playing Oklahoma. I didn't think we had a chance really at all in that game, to be quite honest. No,
you convinced yourself walking in.
No. Of course you have to. You're going into ground zero. You have to, bunker down and be a fan. But
good vibes only.
Yeah, but I mean, like at the end of the day, I didn't really expect anything crazy in that game. I was more hoping that Oklahoma would be really bad rather than we would be really good. I feel more about this game how I felt going into the Ohio State game 2 years ago, a little bit similar to that, where the Ohio State game 2 years ago, I felt like, okay, Ohio State's really good, and we'll definitely find out a lot about our defense. But from what we've seen so far, I think our defense will keep us in this game, and it could end up being interesting. And you know what? It was a pretty interesting and entertaining game. But this year, the difference to me is, here's a fact to illustrate my point. Luke Reimer is questionable. Luke Reimer is questionable going into this game. Now, last year, if Luke Reimer would have been questionable going into any game, that would be like one of the main talking points at the head of this podcast. We're 23 minutes in, and this is the first time we've mentioned it. And he's a beast. Don't get me wrong. We'd love to have Luke Reimer. But what Matt Rule has done with this defense, with the amount of players he's played, it just feels like we have so many dudes at each position that this year, losing Luke Reimer there for a game is not quite as big of a deal as it was last year.
It's not like you're taking a complete cog out of a watch and it won't work anymore.
100%. That's what it felt like before with Luke Reimer. And even 2 years ago when JoJo was out I think it was last 2 weeks, it was sort of that same thing where it was like, yeah. So even the 21 defense, we've given them their props, but really the 21 defense, if you want to be honest, had a great starting unit and really tailed off a lot anytime anybody got hurt. This team, I believe that they have more depth at these positions, and in a grinded out game like against a Michigan, it could be interesting with having fresh legs for everybody in the game. Because look, again, this is going to be a close game because Michigan plays that Big Ten style of, people like to call it small ball, Big Ten style small ball, where you're just keeping the ball, trying to impose your will on the run game. That's what Nebraska's going to try to do.
It is going to be one of those slow burner games.
Yes.
Hopefully, if it's a high scoring game, we're in trouble.
Yes.